The storybook games were a weird time in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Granted, the history of this franchise as a whole was pretty wild when you actually stop and look back on it, but these titles were somehow among the most bizarre entries in a series that sees a super fast blue hedgehog fighting reality warping gods on the regular. The premise of the storybook games was to take that same hedgehog and throw him into the worlds of various mythologies. So now he has mythological gods and spirits to contend with as well. That said, the storybook games only ever got two entries: Secret Rings and Black Knight. The latter is generally seen as the better of these two titles for a variety of reasons, although both games were somewhat controversial on release. In no small part due to the fact that Sonic's reputation as a whole took a nosedive in 2006 and arguably still hasn't fully recovered to this day. That being said, for as much as people mocked the very premise of these games, I honestly think Sonic Team had something interesting going here. Allegedly, they were going to try for a third entry set in Greek mythology, though that unfortunately never went through. A real shame, since Sonic Racing Hermes would have been a sight to see. The entries we did get were centered around Arabic and British mythology, specifically the 1001 Arabian Nights and the Legend of King Arthur. As a whole, I honestly think these games have some solid writing, though as in gameplay, I find that Black Knight beats out its predecessor in terms of story. Today, though, I wanted to take a moment to analyze why. What did Black Knight do to surpass Secret Rings? And what could Secret Rings have done better? Without any further ado, let's talk about it. As mentioned before, the storybook games revolve around transporting Sonic into the realms of myth. In this case, the actual literal storybooks themselves. In both instances, he's called upon by a mysterious female figure who has apparently decided that he's the chosen one who can help them with all their problems. In the case of the Arabian Nights, it's a genie by the name of Shara, who inhabits a magical wish-granting ring in place of a lamp. In the case of Black Knight, it's Merlina, granddaughter to the great wizard Merlin himself. Already we see one of the biggest differences between these two games. While technically both characters are OCs created by Sonic Team, Merlina has a direct connection to one of the most iconic and important figures in Arthurian myth. Shara, by contrast, doesn't really have any basis in the Arabic legends. Sure, she is connected to the big bad of the game, that being the genie from Aladdin's story, but Shara is only the beginning of a much larger issue. The fact that Secret Ring's inspiration feels kind of tacked on at best. I mean, take a look at the cast of Black Knight. In addition to Merlina, we also just straight up have various Knights of the Round Table showing up, the Lady of the Lake, and even a corrupted version of King Arthur as the main antagonist for most of the game. And many of these characters also happen to resemble Sonic's friends. Yeah, the storybook games tend to put other Sonic characters in roles from the story, and I'm not sure if there's ever really a hard reason given for it. A common fan theory is that the book worlds are just causing Sonic to see his companions in place of the characters, which is my personal favorite explanation, but it's ultimately not something that one needs to think about too hard. My point is, each of the characters mentioned above all play pivotal roles in the story. By contrast, Secret Rings does have a few iconic characters from the Arabian Nights, but most of them feel like glorified cameos than anything. Ali Baba, Sinbad, and even King Shahryar make an appearance, though none of them ever really do anything beyond giving Sonic information about his next destination and/or objective. In Black Knight, the Knights of the Round Table, the Lady of the Lake, and even the random blacksmith portrayed by Tails are all actively helping Sonic throughout his adventure, with some of them even becoming playable at certain points. I mean, even the MacGuffins in both games feel like they have varying degrees of thought and effort put into them. Black Knight revolves around the sacred swords of Arthurian myth: Erendite, Galatine, Leviatine, and, of course, Caliburn/Excalibur. The secret rings are just vague parallels to the Chaos Emeralds, I guess? Well, okay, that's not entirely accurate. Supposedly, they're supposed to be the rings binding the book itself together. Moreover, each one represents a different emotion that's supposedly at the heart of Arabian Nights. Prayers, sadness, rage, hatred, joy, pleasure, and wishes. It's an interesting concept, I'll admit, although the rings are still barely explored at all in the game where finding them is supposed to be the main focus. Not only that, they are poorly defined and we have to use vague context clues to figure out what each one may represent. But they all also supposedly have an elemental power tied to them, and yet water is the only one we ever actually see being used in any capacity. The whole emotion thing is never really expanded on either. I mean, there is a precedent for it to be sure. See, the 1001 Arabian Nights are an interesting myth unto themselves. To save time, I'll give you all the Cliff Notes version in this video, but I do recommend looking it up for yourselves if you're interested. Long story short, the supposed origin of this collection of stories comes from a woman called Scheherazade, who was set to be executed for reasons we won't get into right now. To stave off her execution, she used her talent for storytelling to earn the favor of the king. Every night she would tell him a fantastical story, but refused to actually finish until the following night, in which she would start her next tale. As a result, King Shahryar kept postponing Scheherazade's execution so he could hear the end of each story. This persisted for 1001 nights until the king fell in love with her and made her his wife, thus creating the 1001 stories said to be housed in this collection and saving Scheherazade from execution. Now, it should be noted that this story in and of itself is said to be fictional, but the fact remains. Scheherazade told each of these stories in an effort to save her own life. There's certainly room to assume that plenty of emotions would have gone into them. Fear of death, hope to see another dawn, anger and frustration about her current predicament. The world rings, then, could then be interpreted as Scheherazade's emotions and all the things she felt when telling these stories. Too bad Scheherazade makes literally no appearance at all and is never mentioned in any capacity within Secret Rings. The World Rings connection to the emotions serve no function other than to create Darkspine Sonic at the end, a super form fueled by the rings of rage, sadness, and hatred after witnessing Shara's demise. So, it's Dark Supersonic from the anime, but slightly more contrived. Yeah, I've never been the biggest fan of Darkspine. It just comes off as a needlessly edgy transformation that has nothing to do with anything from the Arabian Nights, or Arabic myth in general. At least in Black Knight, Sonic's in-game transformation is triggered by Excalibur and he gets new abilities that fit the situation. He literally becomes a knight in shining armor, which is like the de facto thing that Arthurian legends tend to be known for. Darkspine just kinda comes out of nowhere and doesn't feel like it really fits the vibe of the mythology at all. What makes all of this extra ironic is that there's a super obvious connection staring everyone in the face that the game never makes any effort to address. See, one of the characters that Sonic encounters in Secret Rings is King Solomon. Yes, the one from the Bible. And no, he is not portrayed by any existing Sonic character. Instead, he's just a talking skeleton for some reason, but that's irrelevant. What does need to be highlighted, though, is the fact that King Solomon was said to have been gifted 10 golden rings from God that bestowed him with endless wisdom, as well as the power to control angels, demons, and jinn alike. 10 magical rings that can control spirits. Do I even need to say anything more? I know that would probably throw off the rhythm of the game's main theme, 7 rings in hand, but come on. Eraser Jin wants to break out of the story, so he tries to steal Solomon's rings, which would give him absolute power over all Jin that he could then use to open a path into Sonic's world. To prevent this, Solomon scatters his rings across the stories of the Arabian Nights, and it becomes a race to find them. Then the spirit of Scheherazade, who we can just say is Shara inhabiting one of these rings, seeks Sonic's aid in stopping the Eraser Djinn. This situation basically writes itself, and I am honestly shocked that the writers never seem to make the obvious connections here. Then again, as I said before, Secret Rings barely makes use of the inspiration from its source material to begin with. Oh, and before you say that making any overt references to God or Christianity might be going a little too far, they already have Solomon in the game. Plus, Sega somehow let this infamous line go through.
It might even open the gates of hell!
So yeah, Secret Rings kinda fumbles the ball a bit. Then again, considering that this game was in development alongside 06, I guess I can't be too surprised about that. The fact remains, though, that Black Knight really did learn a lot from the mistakes of its forebearer. That game's not perfect either, mind you, but the story, themes, and overall use of Arthurian source material just hit a lot better than Secret Ring's utilization of Arabic myth. I mean, I haven't even touched on the levels, which themselves are a whole can of worms to dissect. I guess, more than anything, I'm just sad that the storybook games ended so prematurely. Secret Rings was a rocky start, but Black Knight set a precedent that really could have been followed up on in later entries. Seriously, there are a lot of great myths that I feel like Sonic could slot into really well. My personal pick would be the Odyssey, though. But what do you all think? Do you like the Sonic storybook games? Do you wish Sega had continued this side series? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and until next time, stay bright.